This podcast is a collaboration between Costard and Touchstone Productions and the Tales From The Crypt podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another How Not to Make a Movie podcast. I'm Alan Katz.
And I'm Gil Adler.
Today we are talking to Mike Vosburg. Every episode of Tales from the Crypt ultimately began with a piece of cover art. Mike Vosburg drew the covers, and he was an established comic book artist at the time. He'd worked for Marvel, he'd worked for DC, he'd worked for Charlton, he'd worked for, pretty much, I think,
everybody.
Gold Key, yeah, everybody. Although how he got the gig, well, he'll tell that story, and like everything else, you know, we only think we know our own story. Mike's a lovely guy.
Great guy and a great artist, and he did a wonderful job for us on Tales, and we'll learn a lot about it with you when we talk to Mike.
Indeed we will. So hey, here's Mike. Where we all first encountered each other and was on Tales from the Crypt.
Right.
And Gil and I took over as writing, producing, running the show at the beginning of season 3. And that was 24 episodes in. So you had been doing covers for 2 years.
You know, it's interesting. I actually came onto the show not to do covers, but I shared a studio at the time with my friend Howard Chaykin, who's a comic book guy, who had left comics and was, writing, screenplays and things like that. And he was pitching an idea to Joel, and Joel apparently didn't like the idea or whatever. But he said, "Hey, I am going to do this TV show, and I wonder if maybe it's got some comic book stuff, Tales from the Crypt. If I get you to be, do some art for us." And Howard, of course, went, "I'm a writer now. I don't do that stuff anymore, but I'll turn you on to my partner." So they brought me on to do a series of 6, kind of inspirational drawings that they could base the opening of the show on. And when the producer...
concept art.
Yeah. When the producer Bill Teitler ran that idea by me, I went, great. And I threw in a little storyboard just so I kind of worked things out. And it's funny because, when I saw the eventual, the wraparound, the opening of the show, was like, wow, it was just like I did at my board.
So that is all right. So this is all news to me. I've never heard this before. Yeah. This is remarkable. So the opening, the title sequence of
Right.
Tales from the Crypt was actually something that you storyboarded, and that's what it became.
I storyboarded. I did a series of inspirational art. In other words, this is what the the set should look like, so on and so forth. And what was just absolutely fascinating for me was, here I was coming out of the Midwest, and I worked in comics, but I had no connection to film.
Right.
And a couple months later, I get a call from Bill going, "Hey, we got this stuff going on. We've got the set built. You should come by and see it." And I got there, and it was mind-boggling for me because I'm thinking like, wow, those are my drawings, and that's what they look like, on a set. And then I went up, to rest my hand on it, and realized, oh, it's canvas. It was all make believe, but it was still like,
Yeah.
wow. It was really fascinating. And then Bill said, "Hey, we were thinking about this. Maybe we want to open the show, and we want to do a comic book cover. Would you be interested?" And I'm like, sure. I was,
it's
that's how it all started for me.
It's funny hearing that because, of course, it's 30 years after the fact, but after nearly 92 episodes of Tales from the Crypt, that was always the way we opened. One assumes that when the executive producers walked in the door with their brilliant idea to do Tales from the Crypt, they put the idea down on the table there at HBO, and it was it was the show fell from the sky as is, and that is not the case. It really was. It kind of came together in bits and pieces. We just did an episode earlier in the season about how the Crypt Keeper himself came to be, because it really took four people to actually create the Crypt Keeper. It wasn't just one or two or even three people.
And if we knew then what you just said now, I think our second phone call after talking to John Casero probably would have been to you. But we never knew. I didn't know any of this until just now, to tell
Oh
you the
my
truth.
God! You realize what this means, Gil? We've all this time we've been living inside Mike Vosburg's head.
Oh, oh, you poor fools.
Holy shit! Holy shit!
And they thought we were poor fools before this. Now they're really going to know that.
I don't want that on anyone.
We only just started the interview and already I'm blown away. Oh my God!
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that was really interesting. I mean, because it was, and again, it was kind of just like for me, like, oh well, we'll see what happens with this, because you're doing jobs and they show up, and that's kind of the last you hear from sometime. And I mean, and for me, that show went on for a decade.
Yep.
It
Well,
was, you know,
okay.
I was doing comics the entire time, and it was
Yep,
always great because I'd wind up with, you know, they're saying, oh, we're going to do another 6 episodes, and I'd immediately do the math and go, oh, great, that, you know, that means I've got,
Yeah.
you know, a nice piece of income coming in that,
Right.
All right.
it also spoiled me for comics, because what I was getting paid to do covers for Tales from the Crypt was just astronomical compared to what I was getting in comics.
We could have had you cheaper.
Not so loud. Don't say that so loud.
Oh my God! Now he says. All right, look. In typical Tales from the Crypt fashion, let's make this the penultimate moment. We're going to now come back to this and then come to the and then what happened, Mike?
Yeah.
Let's go back to the beginning of the story now. You mentioned Michigan. You came from gloomy Michigan before you eventually came out here. What I've been able to glean, you were into comic books early.
You know, when I was a kid, I did one of the very first comic book fanzines. And Gil, you were talking about Stan Lee, and talking with him, and I'm thinking, you know, in my fanzine, we did the very first interview with with Stan.
It was called Masquerader, your fanzine.
Right, it was like 1963,
Mm-hmm.
and by the time I was 15, 16 years old, I met virtually the majority of the people I was going to work with when I got back into comics 10 years later. Some of them were the pros who, the idea that we were doing a fanzine and with articles about them and their creations, they were just like, somebody even knows our name, because comics was really the low end of art.
Right. Right. Bill used to always say that to me. Bill Gaines. He used to always, you know, when I created this with my dad in 1955, we were bums. No one had any respect for us making this stuff. Now I get some respect because of the TV show. But he said when we first started out, we were just low life.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, the guys who were doing comics that were like the gods of entertainment were the guys who did the syndicated strips, like Alex Raymond doing Flash Gordon, or Hal Foster doing Prince Valiant.
Sure.
And that was always what guys working in comics was, the dream was, maybe someday I can do that. The other thing they discovered were working for advertising comics, which again paid so much more than regular comics. But at any rate, like, I met all these guys, but I was living in Pontiac, Michigan. The idea that I could get a job drawing comics was like, maybe I could go and star in a TV show sometime.
Right.
It was just like
on the side, yeah.
So I mean, I went to college, got my degree, taught school.
Where'd you go?
I went to a little place called Oakland University. when I got out of school,
What did you what did you study? Now you went in. You were interested in art. You were interested in well. What did you
I never
study?
had an art class other than had one in high school. That was basically where they sent the discipline problems, and a few of us who like to draw. And but I mean, when I went to college, I didn't take any art classes. I didn't even know if Oakland had an art program
Hmm.
at the time. Apparently, they did. But um, I was like one of those, very focused students who was like, okay, I've got to pick a major. I hate taking Spanish because it's such a hard course. What can I take that I won't have to take 2 years of Spanish? Well, the only thing at Oakland I could take was teaching. So I went, great, I'll be a teacher. So teaching and English lit. Um, and when I graduated, I got a teaching job, and I probably had the last deferment in America. So I stayed out of the Army for 3 years while I was teaching, which I was like, I didn't want the Army, and it's like I know the Army didn't want me because I was not.
Yeah.
Um,
You are very much a pacifist.
I like to think that it's never been tested, but it's like, yeah, that's my philosophy. But I mean, I've never been in a situation where it's like, okay. So I mean, people who are in like I have a great respect for people who are in the service. I don't always have a great respect for the people who were running the
Mhm.
the situation at the time.
Oh,
But like I
indeed.
said, for people who are actually there, like I said, I have a lot of respect for them. I have friends, from that era. Of course, we're all, good buddies. But um, then and also, I was like a basketball fanatic. So I mean, the two things I did at Oakland was I just, I was a gym rat, and I went to classes. Well, when I was teaching school, I think it was probably at the end of my first year, I was playing in a pickup game and sprained my ankle really bad. I couldn't, you know, I couldn't play basketball. So I thought, oh, I'm going to pick up some of those drawing things again. So I got back into comics and reconnected with some of the guys I knew, from comic fandom.
Hmm.
And these guys were all getting jobs. I mean, it's like the guys I was hanging out with then were like Al Milgram and Jim Starlin, who um, pretty much took that series. What is it, Guardians of the Galaxy?
Right.
Developed it for comics,
Yeah.
and which was funny because years later, after storyboarding the Narnia films, I got to be good friends with Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, and they wound up writing that screenplay. So I'm thinking, oh great, I started out with these guys in comics, and and now these guys, and I never read the comics, and I still haven't seen the movie. So I mean, it's like, um, so I mean that was kind of the interaction. So um, I knew nothing about, like I said, I had no art classes. I knew a good bit about storytelling from just, I did when I was a kid. I was constantly doing my little homemade comic books,
Mhm.
and I show these to kids if I do classes and say, "Hey, look, if there's hope for this kid, there's hope for anybody."
Mhm.
Because it's, but I mean, I learned about the storytelling process, and especially, like I said, from English lit, reading all that stuff,
Yeah. So you were an avid reader.
and that was just, yeah. I didn't
Okay.
have a TV when I was a kid, so for the first, till I was 13, going to the library was like the big event.
You also went to the movies.
Oh, in movies, that was like church.
What
It was
what's the first movie you remember seeing?
Snow White.
Really?
Uh,
How old were you?
I
And
was
not
probably
40 or something like
4 years old.
four.
All that I
Okay.
know is to this day, when I see old women in black, they scare the hell out of me. So it's like that movie scarred me for life.
There you go. Hey,
Um,
that's
but so, like I said, when I decided, it's like comics. Hey, I could draw that. So I spent a summer after I quit teaching, being a janitor and just working on my drawing. And then, I'd go into New York, and it was great because I knew all these guys, and they would be the first one, like, go talk to so-and-so here. He's looking for somebody new. And eventually I got a job by someone at something called Gold Key Comics. He used to do all the, the Disney stuff.
Remember
and apparently he knew nothing about comic or comic book art because he hired me. But he was very funny. He goes, well, you seem like a very nice young man. I think I'll give you some work. So
there you go, your bona fides.
Well, I say, and it's like anything else. Once you have that one, one or two jobs, people go, "Oh, great, he can do it,"
just get in the room, man.
Yeah, the hardest part was I never wanted to go to New York. I mean, I would go there for a few days, get some work, and come home. But it was like, oh, I can't live here. So I always worked as a freelancer from out of town, and that was fairly new in those days. But because there were so many kind of new things going on with Marvel Comics and whatever, you could work like that.
Marvel has a reputation as being it was not necessarily the kindest place towards creatives.
It's like anything else. It's every job I've worked on, you understand that there's like, this is the creative side, this is the business side. Each have our job to do, and we're going to butt heads. I'm reading history all the time because that's kind of my pastime. I find out that everything comes down to three things. It comes down to, finance, politics, and ego. And, you look at our business and you go, yep. It's like,
sure.
I think the only cover I ever had on Tales from the Crypt that was, I had to like redo, came when like, Richard Donner and Joel were having an argument about something. So neither one of them would agree to the other cover the other one wanted. So it was like, okay. So
that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
So like I said, working in comics, working for Marvel, I was fortunate in that I learned early that they weren't my family. So, I mean, they were a business I was working for.
Sure.
And
sure.
I saw so many guys that I knew that worked there for 20, 25, 30 years thinking like, and suddenly they're hitting their 40s and 50s. And it's like, no, not the door, no more work. And I saw the same, like guys here that would work for Disney, doing, animation work. Kind of the same thing. And it's like, you really have to understand that the companies aren't your family. You're there as long as you're useful. So what you really have to learn is, how can I be useful to them? What have I got that they're still interested in?
Now, when you were at Marvel, did you ever speak to or run into Stan?
Oh yeah.
he was there then, right?
One of the funny things that happened to me was I was living in Battle Creek at the time. All of a sudden the phone rings. I pick it up, and there's this guy who goes, "Mike, this is Stan Lee. I just saw that first job you did for Marvel, and I've got to get you here working for you, working for us. You got to do it, And I'm just like, great, I'm ready.
Yeah.
So I signed a contract with Marvel. About 2 or 3 months later, I was in Atlanta and, doing a convention, and Stan was there, and I walked up and I introduced him. He was just getting on the elevator at the time. I said, Stan, I'm Mike, blah, blah, blah. He goes, "Oh, Mike, it's such a pleasure to meet you. Just love your work, blah, 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 blah." And, he was on his way to the airport. He gets in the airport. And later on, I saw the guy who was driving him. I said, yeah, that was kind of neat. Meeting Stan and whatever. And he kind of laughed. He said, I probably shouldn't tell you this. He said, but Stan got on the elevator after you left. And he went, "Mike Vosburg, I'll have to find out who that guy is." I mean, and that was both, like Stan was like the hype. It was always that kind of thing. So, I mean, I never worked with him on anything per se.
We developed a TV show with him a long time ago, and it was great fun working with him. It was an idea of his that we were developing. It never came to anything, but he never learned. I know he never learned my name. I was always, "Hey, kid."
Yeah. So it was. I mean,
I could pass as "Hey, kid" then, but okay.
I mean, it's like the older guys in the industry all swore by Stan in terms of,
You froze.
this guy got us work. This guy, I mean, as comics went from a nickel and dime industry into a $1 billion one,
Yeah.
then there was a lot of, resentment over like, I created this, or I had a hand in it. And that's where the real kind of sad part of it all.
It was really the feature business that turned it when suddenly they could, the rights to the comic. So I'm thinking, is that what turned it when suddenly the properties became, Superman became worth a ton, and then Batman became worth a ton. I mean, suddenly.
Well, no. What you have to understand is that DC Comics was always part of a corporation,
Mhm.
so that they were connected with Warner Brothers, and they were doing features a long time before. Marvel, like I said, started out as this nickel and dime business. So
Right.
you could come along and go, "Hey, I like that character. For $1,000, can I have the rights to him?" Oh, sure. And they'd sign them off.
Yeah.
Well, when they started doing the films and things later, they'd be in the middle of a project, and all of a sudden somebody walk up and go, "I've got a contract from 1968. I signed with you folks." And
Oh God.
they were not, like I said, they were not a business
Yeah.
oriented company that way.
Oh man, they did not know what they were not forward thinking at all.
Well, they were forward thinking in terms of this is how these things can be played up,
Huh.
but in the business end of it, they just, like I said, they still had the same kind of that attitude. Um,
There's still there's an element of when George Lucas made his deal at Fox, and he said, they said, I want the merchandising. They said, take it, like it was nothing.
yeah. See, that's funny too. I think of George Lucas. George Lucas was a big comic book fan,
Yeah.
and one of his big comics was one of his comics that he loved was Star Reach Comics, which had my friend Howard working in it, and so of course when he did the Star Wars comics, he went, "Oh, I got to get Howard to do it." And I always laugh because I used to do a feature in the back of Star Reach Comics called Skywalker. So it was like, I had my part in in handling all that stuff, and I can't really complain about it because I stole the title from Buffy St. Marie. So it's all those things come around that way one way or another.
It's like touch, 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 touch.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So eventually you head out to Los Angeles.
Yes.
When
I
you
just remarried, and my beautiful wife Annie was madly in love with. And one day she says to me, "When are we leaving, or when are we going to go to California?" I went, "Okay, we'll move."
That was her idea.
What's that?
That was her idea.
Well, we had talked about it because it's like, you live in Michigan in the winter, and it's like, oh.
Huh.
The woman I was writing a comic book at the time with was named Christy Marks. She, lived out here, and I said, "Well, great. I'm going to use that as an excuse to go out to California and kind of scout it out."
Sure, sure.
And uh,
And a most auspicious year. It was a terrific year to migrate in 1985.
1984.
Yeah. Well, I moved out in 85, so
Oh, I said we actually moved here in 80. No, we were in here in 84. Yeah.
I read something that said you were 85, so I know.
Whatever. It was like I moved to California,
Yeah.
and two things happened. First of all, it was like working in comics, it was always like this job. I don't know what I could do as an artist. When I moved out here, the first thing was like, wow, there's all these art opportunities. How do I get rid of some of this comic stuff? So I started working in animation fairly quickly because Christy was also the head writer for Hasbro, who was doing all the, she created the or developed the Gem series, and she was doing a lot of work on the GI Joe and all of those. So I wound up doing storyboards for them, which was also very funny because I would go to the to the studios and tell them I was looking for work as a storyboard artist, and they go, "Well, you comic book guys, you really don't understand this whole process, and it's pretty difficult. You can't." And I had another friend who was a storyboard artist, and he said, "Well, dude, you want to do storyboards?" She said, "I can probably show you everything you need to know in about 15 minutes." And so somewhere between these two, I wound up finally, Marvel was just had all these projects going on. They didn't have artists, so the director or producer, whatever I worked with, said, "Hey, I'm going to give you a script. Take it, do what you can with it, bring it back. We'll fix it, and and take it from there." As a kid, my influence, while I liked reading comics and I loved the art, my big influence was movies. And again, bringing in the English lit background, for me, I understood storyboards in a way better than I understood comics, because storyboards, they didn't ask you to draw in a specific style. It was very linear, and so the first board I turned in, I got a call like the next same afternoon, whatever it was, going like, "Hey, you want a job?" And it was funny because all the places I was going to that were going, "No, you don't do this," is like, now my name was on a list. The next week they're calling to go, and of course, like I said, I was doing storyboards. I thought I was getting a princely rate for it because it was the work was much easier and less time consuming than comics.
Uh-huh.
So I could do probably in like 20 to 25 hours a week, I could get my work done, and I could use the rest of the time to just freelance on anything. So it was like an ideal job for and then, like I said, over the next 20 years, you just hopscotch. If like comics were healthy, I would do a job there, do work there. If animation was healthy, I would do there. When things got unhealthy in both, I tried advertising and things like that. But jobs, people ask me where you got jobs from. I'm going, oh, they'd fall out of the sky. The trick is when they came along, to be ready to be able to do that work. I mean, Tales from the Crypt was a great example of, just a job that made my life for 10 years. And I just, like I said, it wasn't like I went out and looked for it. I kind of walked into the situation. When I was late 50s, there was another one of those slumps where just everything was just at a standstill, and I thought, geez, am I gonna have to go back to teaching? And I ran into a friend did comics there, and also was a major film storyboard artist, and said, "Hey, I'm working on these new Narnia films. You should come by and drop off a portfolio." And I went, "Well, okay." So I went by and I
that worked out.
I was good. I dropped off a portfolio and thought, well, this will be the end of that. And about 2 or 3 months later, I get a call in, "Can you come in and meet Andrew Adamson?" So I was like, "Yeah, sure." And I went in and I had a meeting with Andrew. It was great. And he went, "Well, good. We'd like to have you work on the show with us." And I'm like, "Great." And again, what they were, he was apologizing. He said, "Well, we're only paying basic, union rate," which was like at least 50% more than what the animation rate was. So I'm like, "Well, this is great." And it was funny because when I walked out of that meeting, the assistant producer,
so you didn't look disappointed. You could have played them. You could have looked disappointed and oh God, Mike.
When good things happen, you just run with them.
Indeed. Okay,
And,
all right.
it's
You were worth so much more to them.
well, I was gonna say, we walked out of the meeting, and the assistant producer, she said to me, she said, "Wow, I've never seen Andrew hire somebody on their first day like that." Well, I was like, okay. But it was the perfect situation, because I came out of animation wanting to get into live action.
Sure.
This was Andrew's first live action film, and he wanted to storyboard the entire film, including dialogue. Well, most storyboard artists, you don't storyboard dialogue, because you're not going to give a board to Robert De Niro and go, "Okay, make sure you get these expressions in here." So we kind of meshed together well that way. And I found that in same thing that I learned from from storyboarding or animation, it's that if you have solid storytelling and you make interesting, straightforward pictures, that's the real key to doing this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed to say, when I was working on Tales, I had 2 or 3 opportunities to storyboard, and they were always, one was with John Frankenheimer. And so I showed up at his house on a Sunday afternoon. He has a meeting with somebody, there, and we're talking. And he says, okay, I'll start running you through this stuff. And he's going through and he goes, okay, for this scene, I need you to get out your lens protractor. And I'm going, I really don't know what a lens protractor is. He just, you don't know what a lens, what kind of storyboarders you call yourself, blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, I'm just here on a Sunday afternoon, doing a favor,
Did he get over that hurdle?
No.
Oh, fuck.
I showed up. I was standing on a set because I would take pictures like a couple days later. And I'm standing on the set and he's looking. All of a sudden he notices me and he just goes, anybody who doesn't belong on this set, get out of here. And I'm like,
oh, no, really?
Okay. It's like, all right. So
he probably would actually. He probably saw Alan and myself somewhere.
Well, I found out later that it's like when he left the set, he got this standing ovation of boos, and somebody mooned him, and whatever else. So it was like, okay, I wasn't the only one. But and then Gil, you had me do storyboards on a project, and it was like one of these things where like I rushed through it, and it was like. I was very interested in getting all the the information down.
Right.
But what I've learned about boards since is that making them look pretty sells them, because you've got 2 people looking at boards. You've got the creative person who understands all the little hen scratches. Mm-hmm. And then you've got the money people who are going, well, what's this all about?
Right.
So, when we would do animatics on the Narnia films, or even in animation, we always have the executives be watching them, and they go like, so now is this going to be in color? Are these people going to speak later? It was just like, So
do you remember what project it was that you did work on for me?
It was one of the ones, I'm trying to think, the woman in the bathtub, and I've got it someplace. I have to look.
Was it
that's the beginning of Demon Night, isn't it?
Might have been that. I remember because
it's the Crypt Keeper segment, Demon Night.
And it was like one of those projects where like, wow, this is, and I recommended another friend of mine who she took over the project and did very well on it, and went on and did several other films after that. When they're shooting Demon Night, I think we probably had about 2 times where they called together the entire crew on Tales from the Crypt to speak to us as a group. One time was at the end of a season. I think they were waiting to find out if they were going to go union, and they weren't. So they called us all together for that. The other time, I was on the set.
I don't recall being invited to that meeting. Were you invited to that meeting, Gil?
I was under the covers.
I think it might have been for Whirlpool with
yeah.
I think Mick Garrett was directing it.
Yeah.
Right.
And who was it? Ernest
Rita Rudner and Richard Lewis.
Yes.
But Ernest Dickerson was doing the Demon Night, and I had met him, and he came up to me and said, "Hey, would you introduce me to Mick Garris?" I went, "Sure," So I went over and introduced him, and they're over there talking. Well, meanwhile, I'm over, and there's this whole table where they've had these magazines that they've just cut up, slashed, and they were all old magazines from the 50s. And they were just, they'd gone through them to cut out stuff, and they were a junk pile. But one of the things that I do is, of course, I go through old magazines to look for illustration. So I'm looking at one of these magazines, and I come across this, this page that's got this nice illustration on it. So I cut it out. I took it with me. 2 days later, they call the whole crew together, and they go, "The other day, someone was here destroying prop masters, how out of that, and they're reading the riot act like this is, and and afterwards I went up and said, hey, that was me. It's like, I'm not giving you the illustration back, but, blah, blah, blah. And of course they were like, well, don't do it again. And it had nothing to do with me. Apparently there was a piece of furniture that they had rented, and somebody sat on it with a comb and put a big rip in it. And it was one of those things where they couldn't really, complain about, okay, this is property, it's important. So we do have this guy over there that was ripping up magazines. So let's
Oh man. Oh boy.
You know,
That's so noir.
I didn't take any of these, things too seriously, whether they were for my benefit or whether they were working against me. It was just like, whatever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, you have always been a fan of noir,
Of what?
of noir, of the of film noir, of noir literature. You're a fan of Hammett. You're a fan of Chandler.
You know, yeah, Hammett and Chandler. Like I said, I love that stuff. Noir films take on an entirely different film for me because I think noir films can be really dark, and it's like, no, what I like, I'm much more a fan of William Powell
Hmm.
and that light touch. I mean, I love movies from the 30s and 40s, but I love like I said, the mixture of comedy and the darkness.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. Yeah.
it's it was Val Lewton and who was the director that did like Cat People and things like that. I
Val
think those
Lewton,
are amazing. But I mean, like a lot of the noir detective films from the late 40s and 50s, the post-war stuff, to me, it's just like, lighten up.
where where Hammett and Chandler were concerned, I mean, they invented noir, more or less. And I've always suspected that they invented noir to try to figure out Los Angeles. Because this is now I moved here in 1985 and I was determined.
Hammett basically was working from San Francisco and that. So, but anyway,
But ultimately it's still, and there's still California to it.
right.
But the thing about noir, where a lot of, especially when it got filmic, LA is the strangest place. The sun shines most of the year, and yet there's a darkness to this place that outshines the sunshine by a magnitude of it's the weirdest place. And I think a lot of people have tried to figure that out. Everyone here seems to come to a terrible ending. It just seems to be the nature of the place that everyone ends badly. They either die or there's tragedy at the end. Yeah, it's never, there's something about noir that was trying to get at that, to understand how is that happening always in this place. It's the corruption here.
One of the like the series I work on is my detective series, my Retrowood.
Yes. Which is to me, it is redolent of everything that I just said.
Well, like I said, one of the things I really deal with in Retrowood is like this town where the whole thing is set up to create fantasies. So you've got all these fantasies, and on the other side of it, do you remember the murder mystery from the 20s of, what was it, William?
Yes. William Desmond Taylor.
William Desmond Taylor. And was it King Vidor wrote this great book in the 50s about that whole murder. But what really fascinated me was that, the cops were paid off at the time, okay, to kind of look the other way. Well, when that administration went out and the next one came in, they had a whole list of like, and these are the people we collect from.
Oh, sure.
And
Sure.
so, but what just astounded me was like, they were still paying in the 50s. I mean, this was like 30 years later. And I mean, this list just went on and thing. Because I came out of like the Midwest, where like Chicago, the most politically,
Sure.
corrupt town in the country. And I'm thinking, wow, they're amateurs. It's LA is just like, it's fascinating in terms of
It was generational. It was built into the architecture. The LAPD was staggeringly corrupt. It was, and it just it's so strange for such a sunshiny place to be so vile on such a deep seated level. Um, it's the we talk about the Whirlpool episode. It's funny. Mick Garris, he cast me in that,
mhm.
and I think he did that because he felt bad because Mick is great at very imaginative stunt casting,
Uh-huh.
and it was not written the way that he cast it. It was he went outside the box when he cast Rita Rudner. It was not how I wrote it, and I didn't particularly care for the casting. And I think he says I don't think I said that outright that I didn't like the casting, but it was hard to hide. I'm not that much of an actor. So it was kind of it's that I ended up a piece of your art in that as in the episode is God. This is my I'll never get a Hirschfeld, but this is better.
The other side for me is like I said, on my little, coming out of Pontiac, Michigan is like, yeah, I'll star in a TV show someday. So I think I probably pestered Gil until he said, yeah, you can do a cameo. So what was funny about it was I wound up on the set.
Yeah.
I think I was there for 3 days. I was working on screen for maybe an hour. And
Yeah.
of that hour, I was on screen for 1.5 to 2 seconds. And everybody goes, yeah, that's pretty normal for movies.
Yeah.
But then the big thing was, and then I got my paycheck. And I went, hey, I'm not leaving this art business. I think it was like they were paying like, $8 or $10 an hour maybe or whatever.
Oh, it was
Stuff. It was just like,
HBO, man. And you were a day player, man. We had you for nothing.
well, if only I'd got a speaking part. So, but it still amuses me sometimes. Like and like a few years back, I'd be like surfing through TV, and all of a sudden, and when that episode might come on, and I'd be like, wow, there I am. So
Can I ask a question going back into comics for a second? Just something that it's not a world I fully understand. And it's the difference between penciling and inking. Now, I know what the difference is, but there was earlier in your career you didn't ink what you'd penciled, and
comics,
sometimes and sometimes so you weren't seeing your vision fully realized. True.
well, so what you have to understand about comics is it's collaboration and it's a factory. So and because it was periodicals, you had to get it out by the month.
Yeah.
So the idea was that one person does this, give it to the next person, give it to the next person, give it to the next person. So for me, I had idols that I grew up with that they penciled their work, but they also inked it. There was a guy named Joe Kubert that was just like a master at that. Anybody who did syndicated strips was the same way. And
Why? Just asking a complete outsider's question. Why would you not ink what you've penciled?
um, penciling, you're working in gray, and you're putting down shapes and things like that. When you're inking, you need a surgeon like hand, which I never had. And also, at the time, inking was a very stylistic approach with a lot of like this, intricate rendering and a very slick thin line. As I learned more about drawing, um, what I discovered was that okay, you paint with a paintbrush on your black and white drawing the same way that you would with if you were doing paints. So I mean, one of the great things about working on Tales from the Crypt was like they weren't looking for necessarily that slick Marvel look to the work. They wanted likenesses. So I mean, I could try different things. I was coloring the work afterwards to bring out effects. So I was producing a fully, a finished illustration in
Right.
that sense. You didn't always have, in like I said, in comics you didn't have that luxury. Um, and
It's a bit more of a factory process.
yeah, and to get back to what you were talking about, um, I like the dark noir look. That's what I wanted to do when I was a kid. Um, so I mean, I use a lot of black when I'm drawing my comics, when I'm drawing my storyboards or whatever. And for traditional comics, that wasn't always a style that was gonna, that was appreciated. So um, on the other hand, I did get an absolutely great comic book out of Tales from the Crypt. Gil, I have to send you one of these.
Oh, wow.
And I think I told you before, I created this Lori Lovecraft character because every week, we have this beautiful young new ingenue on the set who was doing an episode, and she'd had a part in somebody's movie, or she was somebody's girlfriend, or whatever it was.
Mhm.
And it'd be like, this hype. And as time went on, you realized, wow, that's the last time I ever saw her. It's like, it's like you were there, you blinked, and you were gone.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, so I created this Lori Lovecraft character who's one of these young, hot looking girls in Hollywood, and she turns 24, 25, and like she's over the hill. She's, her career is over. So she has to find some. So she turns to sorcery, and she's not really any better at it. But it's like, it gave me a chance to do all these stories. They were basically pastiches of my favorite films from the 30s and 40s because I could cast like Bob Hope and Bing Crosby and Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi and William Powell and even did a Hitchcock one. And again, I always wanted to be Mad Magazine artist when I was a kid.
Mhm.
So this gave me a chance to do kind of a sophisticated, it was always a lot of fun. I can't say it ever made me much money, but it was, I had a lot, it's like when I look at those, I get a lot more excited about them than I look about my Marvel or DC Comics career, things like that.
After Tales, among the other things that you did, you did a little bit of directing. You won an Emmy for directing an episode of Spawn.
Two things. Again, that was another one of those jobs that I was at a point in my career like, I don't know what I want to do. And I ran into a friend who introduced me to Catherine Winder, who was working at HBO Animation, and she hired me. And that was easily the best job I ever had in animation in terms of creative freedom and just Catherine. I think she lives up in your area now, in Vancouver. I think she has an animation studio up there,
Wow.
So
What's the name of their animation studios? Yeah.
you're pushing
Yeah.
it. So
Never mind. Never
she
mind.
was the best people person I ever worked with in terms of like, what can you do? How can we help you? How can moving back and forth.
Sure.
So, but I always, while I appreciated, I mean, while I'm proud of the work I did there, I think, wait a minute, I directed 2 episodes of animation, and I wound up winning an Emmy. And this is something that guys come to Hollywood and they work all their life for, And I'm thinking, thank you, I appreciate it. On the other hand, I think of myself as a pretty fair artist, and I don't think I've ever been nominated to be nominated for any art award. So it's just, it's like I said, my friend Chaikin was just telling him he was elected, to the Comic Book Hall of Fame, and I was, well, congratulations. He said, well, about 10 years too late, but I'm saying, hey, when these things come along, you just thank you and go, hey, thank you, I'm glad I'm here.
Yeah.
Do you have any desire to do more of that?
Well, that was very funny because after I did a couple episodes, Catherine said, well, okay, next year do you want to direct more? We want you to direct more. And I went, no. I said, I said, directing, I'm just in charge of more things I have no control over. I really enjoy storyboarding. I like storyboarding. I do. I'm good at that. Let me just continue that way.
Mhm.
So,
it was a mountain that you're glad you climbed, but you had no need to go back to it.
yeah, it was um, it was one of those glamorous things. Yeah, what I do remember was when I was a storyboard artist, nobody ever did much of anything, and we had who was it? Ming Na was in an episode, and she told me she was a big comic book fan or whatever. So I did a drawing of her for a character. Well, 2 days later, she shows up with a whole thing of flowers for me, and and a thank you or whatever. And I'm thinking, man, this never happened when I was a storyboard artist. So every job has its perks. So,
It is remarkable. These days, you are still incredibly busy doing a ton of things.
Gil, you'll understand this. I stay busy because if I'm not busy, I'm like, ooh, what's this? Oh, what happened to this one yesterday?
You're still doing your two books. You're still doing Retro Wood and Lori Lovecraft.
Lori, I'm pretty much finished with.
Okay, so she's
I've just got to
you've
the
put her
point.
to bed.
What's that?
You've put her to bed.
It's like what I discovered about drawing comics is the emotional part of it is a big thing. And um, at my age, I just can't get excited about drawing, like this incredible looking young woman the way that I could 30, 40 years ago.
Sure,
Uh,
sure.
the Retrowood stuff, I'm wrapping up kind of some of that too because it requires a lot of me as an artist. I'll still continue to do comics just because I've been doing it since I've been 12 years old. So, I just and strangely enough, I've just started doing covers for Marvel comics, which I'm going, I never thought I'd see that happening. But years ago I used to draw this character called She-Hulk. And now, of course, they've done the TV series with her, which I haven't seen yet. But um, since Disney is very um, much more than Marvel ever would about, okay, let's make sure we got all our T's crossed and whatever. We've got everyone signed off on this. Since I work on the comic book, they gave me a settlement to go, okay, if we use things, whatever, and you get a certain amount. So, and part of it was like, well, why don't you do some covers for us too? So I'm like, okay, that sounds like fun. So far it's been a good experience. I'll wait and see what happens. I learned this was one of the funny things that happened on Tales from the Crypt. I was in the office one day and I happened to be walking by because Zemeckis was there doing something, and Forrest Gump had just came out the day before, and he's on the phone with somebody screaming like, "What do you mean we didn't have the rights to that song?"
Oh God. Oh
I
boy.
remember the same
Hey.
thing that was like on what was it, Tales from the Crypt? It was like, oh wait, we didn't get a sign off to use her likenesses on. So it was some weird thing. Like as like a creative person, I'm just like, okay, here's a picture, I'll draw it. But there's all these legal things that come in that are just one after the other. So
I hope you then tiptoed out of the office quickly.
oh, I just walked by his door, so I didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I thought it was very funny because I did a storyboard for Bob Zemeckis about that time. He had this new show called Johnny Bago. I think he wanted to do, and I can remember it was really funny because he said, "Okay, meet at the studio," and then we all drove out to Malibu or whatever, and we're on the beach, and he's running through all the stuff, and I'm kind of sitting there going, "Well, we'll get to talk about storyboards afterwards." And he runs through this whole thing, what he's doing. He gets done with it and he turns to me and goes, "So did you get all that?" And I'm like, sure. And I went home and, because fortunately I had been paying attention.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
went home and did the storyboard and I brought it back. And he looked at it and went, "Oh, this is great. This is great. This is great." Unfortunately, we're not doing that sequence, so it was like, that's funny. But, and I remember pitching him was doing a comic book at the time called Offcasts for Marvel that was creator owned. So I was pitching him, the idea, and he turned it down to do something like Forrest Gump or something like that. I mean, can you believe that?
Yeah.
So, it was, but
Choices these people
choices.
make.
When I was just getting into comics, or
Yeah.
actually, I was been in comics for probably 7 or 8 years, and I was at a convention, and this kid rushes up to me, and he has this little mimeograph thing, and he goes, "Hey, we've got a new comic we're doing. Tell us what you think of it." And I remember getting it and saying, "Oh, thanks. I'll look at this," and looking at time and thinking like, "God, don't quit your day job." Well, that was Kevin Eastman who created the Ninja Turtles. That's what he was giving me, and it was I was not not anyone who could pick talent out. I had another friend
Huh.
in Battle Creek when I was living there. He was working on this new independent film, and he would bring me rushes of it, show me little video clips and things like, "Oh, that's going to be the greatest new horror film," and I'm kind of like, "Oh boy." And he was working with some guy named Sam Raimi, and they were doing The Evil Dead. He was doing all the props for him, and I was thinking of that later, like, wow, thank God I'm not a talent agent, because I'd be missing them all.
So there's no talent spotting in your future.
Well, I always tell people I don't believe in talent for one thing.
Huh.
It's, I never met anybody who was an artist that woke up one day and knew how to draw, knew how to do all this stuff. It's Einstein said it best. It's 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. Talent might be a little seed in there somewhere, but it's depending
Execution driven.
exactly how much how much you want it, how much you're willing to, how hard you want to work,
Yeah.
luck, circumstance, whatever. It's just all those things come into it.
Mike, we can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this with us. We need to do this again.
All right.
I think we've only tapped the surface here. There's so much more to talk about, really, in the comics world, but also your story. We have but scratched the surface.
Well, I want to go back and talk about Tales from the Crypt because I think there was just fascinating stuff going on there all the time for me. I mean, in fact, it's just the idea of like the first couple of years I worked there with Bill Teitler, or first season, basically they would give me, like this is the person who's in the show. We need a likeness, and they'd give me headshots. Or of course, the actor's always like, and of course, yeah, but I'm drawing in while they're killing somebody or whatever.
Right.
So, because I'd never been on a movie set, I thought, I talked Bill next year. I got to explain to him that I really got to be on the set to take some pictures of these people. So that was, and he said, well, okay, but don't get in anybody's way or whatever. So I wound up coming onto the set, and well, he had good reason probably for saying that because I was going to cut up magazines later on and stuff. So so I mean I wound up on the set, and I was just like fascinated with. I think the first person I had to take a picture of like that was Leah Thompson, and I said, okay, and I said, what. Did she, I have to take a picture. She goes, well, my character's doing this. And she immediately breaks into the character in the exact shot that I needed. And I'm like, wow, this is great. This is, it's so much easier than doing it the other ways. So, and every so often I'd have somebody like we had Treat Williams on a show, and he said, I've got a great idea for what we should probably do with this. And he gave me the exact shot that I needed for the cover. So,
we will have to do a whole episode of Tales from the Crypt. In fact, what we should do, Gil, is we should put together a Crypt episode where we talk about stuff like this. Because hearing you talk about it, Mike, it's funny. It's just so normalized in our heads that we forget how remarkable all that stuff was. That there is a process to it that
we have a few
the audience would enjoy.
We have a few John Frankenheimer stories to compete with yours and perhaps some other people.
Yeah.
I'm sure mine would be the tip of the iceberg compared to yours. But and by the way, I pulled out all these old Bordello blood. For some reason, I did 2 versions of that cover for you people. I don't know.
Oh, for Bordello. Oh God.
One, and not only that, but I found out all the little roughs that I did for the show, for that episode. And I found out there were some storyboards that I did for you afterwards, Gil, you were doing corrections on some stuff. So
yeah.
Mike, You're going to give him PTSD, Mike.
Right. I'm going to go into shock. More so than I already am in.
The title that you guys came up with is "How Not to Make a Movie."
Yeah,
Right.
well, hey, yeah, we've done that. We've done that thing. So anyway, we'll let's do a whole crypt episode with you, Mike, because episode by episode, I'm sure I'd love to know what was the why that moment, and our crypt audience, this is the stuff that they really enjoy, and hey, who are we to argue? So hey, Mike, you're coming back.
Like I said, I'd love to just let me know. There's questions I have for you. It's like, I missed that whole season in England, and I'm drawing these people, and I come out later on like, oh my God, that's Ewan McGregor. That's Francesca Annis. So
yeah.
Oh my God! Yeah, we've been talking for an hour. If we hadn't been, I would say, okay, let's dig in. Let's do a whole nother show on that, because
there will be another day.
Yeah. Cool. Hey,
we actually in England we had 007 in a Tales from the Crypt before he became 007.
Yeah.
Yeah, Daniel Craig in that one, and
yeah. We
who knew?
Well,
it was so much
for me is here. I remember sitting on the set and talking to Richard Thomas one day and being like really involved, blah, blah, blah. And I completely ignored this, one of these young ingenues that walked by. It turned out to be Patricia Clarkston, who 15 years later suddenly, becomes famous.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Who knew?
It was the amazing thing about Crypt. It was things came together that just did not come together. Yeah, film and TV came together in a most unusual way that never happened before, or really quite since.
Well,
but we'll do a whole episode about that.
I was really happy to be there. So
good. Yeah, we will. That will be great fun. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, everyone, as always. And we will see you next time.
Mike, thanks so much. It was a pleasure, and likewise. See you next time.
Okay, one last word to my friend Jack out there who's healing. Get better. Okay.
Get better, Jack. The How Not to Make a Movie podcast is executive produced by me, Alan Katz, by Gil Adler, and by Jason Stein. Our artwork was done by the amazing Jody Webster, and Jason Jody, along with Mando, are all the hosts of the fun and informative Dads from the Crypt podcast. Follow them for what my old pal the Crypt Keeper would have called terrific Crypt content.